Hey guys, and welcome to Should You Buy It, where all we do is talk a little bit about the game and whether or not we think it's worth the cost.
In this episode, we'll be playing Terraria, the open-world survival sandbox RPG game where your goal is to cut, cast, and shoot your way through several bosses in order to reach and defeat the almighty Moon Lord.
The first question that we always cover in these videos is what stage of development is the game in? And in this case, Terraria is in full release and available on mobile for $5, PC for $10, Xbox and PlayStation for $20, and Switch for $30. Now before we get into things, we want to make it clear that we played the PC edition of the game, and we'll be reviewing it from the PC's price of $10. We chose PC because it has the most content available, and that is our preferred platform to play on.
So what exactly is Terraria? Well, Terraria has many fun mechanics that make the game interesting, and we want to start with the building and exploration aspects of the game. Your first goal in the game is usually to explore your surroundings and set up some sort of base in order to allow NPCs in the game to move in. These NPCs can do things such as heal you and your party members, allow you to buy valuable goods, or reforge your equipment. However, in order to progress, you must craft weapons and armor that will give you the strength you need to partake in combat with increasingly challenging foes.
Now, combat seems to be one of the main draws for this game. Terraria uses a gear-based system to determine your class. This is similar in a sense to something like Skyrim, where if you're wearing heavy armor that gives you a melee damage bonus, then you would be considered a melee class. Or if you're wearing wizard robes, you would be considered a mage class. In total, there are 4 classes available at the time of this video, which are melee, mage, ranger, and finally, my personal favorite, the summoner. I think classes are pretty self-explanatory in the sense that rangers use ranged weapons like bows or guns, while the summoner focuses more on summoning creatures to fight for them. The great thing about Terraria's classes is that each one feels well balanced and playable, although some may take more skill than others at different stages of the game, and a great example of this is that the melee class becomes somewhat difficult to use as you get towards the end of the game, where bosses can now 1 and 2 shot you, but you have to be right next to them in order to put out the maximum amount of damage.
Speaking of which, the bosses in this game are probably the biggest draw for us. The game in total has about 30 bosses or so, a few of which are restricted to certain consoles, but for the most part, the game has ample bosses for you to fight. Now, all of these bosses vary in difficulty to both fight or sometimes even unlock the ability to fight. Plus, if you aren't into the whole boss thing, the game gives you the ability to only fight the mandatory bosses that are required to progress in the game.
Now let me just warn you, some of these bosses, especially on the higher difficulties, can get really hard. For an example, one of the first bosses you're going to come across is the Eye of Cthulhu. He isn't too hard once you learn how he works, but the last boss in the normal mode is the Wall of Flesh. And let me just tell you, I think I died to this thing like 20 times before I got my first kill on him. The reason for that was I didn't think about the concept of building things in the world in order to help me in defeating the boss. Now, one of my favorite things about Terraria is that it doesn't really give you some boss arena to fight in. It just says, okay, the boss spawned, good luck. And at the beginning, you might fight on the top of a house that you made, or maybe you'll just fight somewhere in the forest. But as you play the game more and more, you'll start to realize that the bosses are getting harder and harder, and that really just isn't an option. Terraria all but demands on later bosses that you build yourself a fighting arena in order to fight these crazy things. For me, the first time I had to do this was when we fought the Wall of Flesh in literal hell. And we needed a platform to run from the thing, since if the Wall of Flesh touches you, it is instant death. Yes, instant death. By the time we were done, the platform that we had made expanded, I think, 1/3 of the entire map. It was completely ridiculous.
Next, let me explain what we meant when we said normal mode earlier. Normal mode is what you start in, regardless of difficulty in Terraria. It is the state of the world. This is where you'll fight all the beginning monsters and bosses, and once you are able to defeat the Wall of Flesh, the world turns into hard mode. hard mode buffs all the monsters in the world from slimes to demons in hell to hit harder and have more health, but in return adds environments, ore, and bosses so you can get significantly more powerful than you were before.
Now, every difficulty has normal and hard mode within it, but not every difficulty has all the items in the game. This is because the game doesn't give you treasure bags when you defeat bosses unless you are on expert difficulty or higher. There are 4 difficulties which you can choose from to create your world. Journey, which is more of kind of a relaxing experience without much of a challenge. Normal, where most people usually want to go for just a little bit of challenge, but you don't want to play Dark Souls. Expert is where people who have probably already beaten the game on normal mode usually go and want a more difficult challenge and access to all those items. And then finally, we have Master Mode, where you go to punish yourself in a game that feels more difficult than Dark Souls at times. They also go a step further and allow you to set your character to different difficulties within each of these worlds. This starts with Journey, where you go and you drop nothing on death and start with extra equipment. Classic, where you just drop nothing on death. And then Medium Core, where you drop only the money you had on death. And then finally, you have Hardcore, where your character is deleted if you die. Trust me, do not play Master Difficulty Worlds on a hardcore character. Your game will last like 3 seconds before you get one shot by the weakest slime in the entire game.
Another nice touch to the game was the fact that they add seasonal based events, which is why you see us running around in costumes since this video was recorded around Halloween. Most of these events are mostly cosmetic, but it also adds a small amount of content, such as new monsters or items that you can collect while they're going on. So now we're going to move into the pros and cons.
First up for the pros is that this game has a lot of customization, and what we mean by that is there are tons of different ways to customize the game in a way that you want to play it. Next is the large variety of enemies within the game. It really gives you tons of different places to go and bosses to fight, more than you would think so for a $10 game. After that, we have that there is an extensive amount of content within such a small game. It gives you lots of new items, and I've seen tons of people on threads saying that they're finding things they never knew existed after 1,000 hours. After that, we have that there are multiple difficulties within the game, and I really liked this because I could play the game like it was Dark Souls, or I could play it like I was in a peaceful Minecraft server. And lastly, we have that there is a great modding community behind this game. There are all sorts of new types of mods that add monsters or bosses or items or environments to the game. You name it, it's out there.
So now moving over to the cons, the only one that we could even really think of was maybe the fact that there was no clear tutorial, which led to a semi-steep learning curve. But is that really a con? I feel like that's kind of the whole point and the whole fun of the game, so maybe not. So I guess we're at the rating then, and when we rate games, we want to get 1 hour of enjoyment out of every $1 that we spend on the game. And for this game in particular, in Terraria, we would want to get 10 hours of enjoyment at least out of the $10 that we both spent on the game. After putting 24 played hours into this game, we give it... We did it, boys. We mined our first 10 out of 10 potatoes with Terraria.
Honestly, this is a game for any and everyone, and while some people may not get that 1,000 hours out of it, we feel that there is surely something here for everyone inside this gem of a game. There are still constant updates and a large community of players, so picking up Terraria is still worth it, even though the game is almost 10 years old now. If you don't already own this game by some chance, we highly recommend you go out and purchase it, because you will most definitely get your money's worth.
Now, if you want more money-saving content, consider subscribing to our channel, where we release new videos every single week where we spend the money so you don't have to. Make sure you guys smash that like button, and as always, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.